quiet shores of the wise people of the water, where the rivers keep their secrets and the mountains stand guard. This is the High Strangeness Sleep Society. A gathering for sleepless dreamers, wanderers of the night, and seekers of the strange. Here, in the stillness of the late hours, we trace the lines between myth and memory, between the world you know and the one just beyond it. So settle in, breathe deep, and let the night unfold.
Chapter 1. The Journalist and the Phenomenon. John Keel never planned to become a prophet of the unexplained. He was a writer, first and always. Words were his craft. In the years after World War II, he lived the kind of restless life that belonged to journalists of another age. He worked in radio, traveled the world, and wrote for whoever would print his stories. He was curious, skeptical, and sharp, the kind of man who could walk into a strange town, listen for an hour, and leave with a full picture of the place in his head. By the 1950s, when flying saucers filled the headlines, Keel saw an opportunity. He wanted to understand what was really behind the lights in the sky, not the rumors, not the hysteria, but the facts. He began collecting reports from newspapers and small-town witnesses. He followed the stories of saucers and glowing discs from Ohio to Pakistan. Most could be explained away: balloons, aircraft, stars mistaken for visitors, but some refused to fit neatly into the world of reason. He noticed that many witnesses reported more than lights. They spoke of strange sounds, of voices on the radio that weren't broadcasts, of coincidences that seemed to multiply around certain places. In one letter he wrote, "It is as if the phenomenon follows those who notice it." That thought would never leave him. By the early 1960s, Keel had become one of the few writers willing to treat UFOs as a serious mystery rather than a spectacle. Yet even he was cautious. He did not believe in visitors from outer space, not yet. He believed that something was happening, but it was not as simple as travelers from another planet. The deeper he looked, the stranger the connections became. Reports of glowing objects often came from places already known for haunted houses, psychic events, and folklore about spirits. The same people who saw lights in the sky sometimes reported knocks on walls or odd figures in their dreams. It was as if the phenomenon wore many masks. Keel began to suspect that the mystery was not just physical. It seemed to operate on the level of meaning, almost as if it responded to belief. When people expected miracles, they saw angels. When they feared invasion, they saw saucers. When they looked for answers, the answers bent themselves into questions. He did not call it alien, he called it something older. And so began his long journey into what he would later name Operation Trojan Horse, his attempt to unmask the intelligence that seemed to stand behind the UFO myth. Chapter 2: The Masks of the Visitors. John Keel once wrote that the history of the world is the history of a long, continuous contact, not with beings from distant planets, but with intelligences that have always been here, living alongside us, appearing and disappearing as they please. He called them ultraterrestrials. Not aliens, not spirits exactly, but something in between. They seemed able to shift shape, to borrow from the human imagination, and to appear in whatever form suited the moment. In ancient times, people saw them as gods or fairies, shining figures who lived in the hills and forests. In the Middle Ages, they were angels or demons, moving through dreams and holy visions. In the modern world, they became astronauts, wrapped in silver suits and blinking lights. Each generation named them according to its own fears and fascinations, yet the pattern remained the same: strange lights, missing time, voices from the air, and sudden disappearances. Keel began to see these not as separate mysteries but as echoes of one another. He noticed how myths from opposite sides of the world mirrored each other. The Celtic tales of fairies who lured travelers into glowing circles resembled modern stories of abduction and paralysis. The bright chariots of ancient India sounded like early reports of discs in the sky. Even the trickster spirits of Native American stories shared traits with the so-called space beings of the 20th century: elusive, curious, and often mischievous. Keel suggested that these entities use belief as their material. They shape themselves from what people already expect to see. When a culture fears devils, they appear as demons. When it dreams of exploration, they appear as visitors from the stars. To him, this explained why UFO encounters changed with each decade. In the 1940s, people reported metallic saucers. In the 1950s, sleek space brothers delivering messages of peace. By the 1960s, the stories turned darker: creatures that caused radiation burns or vanished mid-sentence. The phenomenon mirrored the collective mood of the age. Keel did not think these entities were evil, but he believed they were tricksters, playful, deceptive, and entirely beyond human understanding. They seemed to delight in confusion. They gave false names, false predictions, false miracles. They appeared to some as saviors, to others as tormentors, and to most as something impossible to categorize. He wrote, "The phenomenon has no single shape. It is a theater, and the audience supplies the script." It was an idea that set him apart from nearly every other UFO researcher of his time. While others searched the skies for hardware, Keel began searching the human mind. He wondered if the visitors were not from another world at all, but from another layer of this one, a realm that overlaps with ours, glimpsed only in moments of high strangeness. And if that was true, he thought, then maybe we have never been alone. Chapter 3: High Strangeness in the Field. By the mid-1960s, John Keel had traded the comfort of his New York apartment for long nights on back roads and small-town motels. He traveled light, carrying notebooks, a tape recorder, and a camera that rarely captured what he hoped to see. He called this period his wanderings. He followed reports of strange lights and silent objects across the Midwest and the Ohio River Valley. One week, he might be in West Virginia interviewing a farmer who swore a glowing sphere had hovered over his field. The next, he was in Kentucky, recording a family who claimed their phone rang at night but carried no human voice. At first, he tried to stay detached. He was a journalist, not a believer. But the deeper he went, the more reality began to bend. In one letter to a friend, he wrote, "It feels as if the phenomenon knows where I am going before I do." There were nights when lights followed his car for miles, rising and falling with impossible precision. Radios switched on by themselves. Telephone lines clicked and whispered even when unplugged. Witnesses he had never met described details that matched those from cases hundreds of miles apart. The same lights, the same humming sound, the same lost time. He began to notice a rhythm to the madness. A UFO sighting in one county would be followed by reports of ghostly apparitions in another. Poltergeist activity, psychic dreams, strange visitors, all seemed to move together as if choreographed. The more data he collected, the less sense it made. What began as a search for spacecraft was becoming a collage of human experience, a network of events connected by coincidence and emotion rather than evidence. Keel started to think of it as high strangeness, a level of reality where ordinary rules collapsed. Logic broke down. The line between fact and fiction blurred. He once described it like a fog. When you enter it, he said, you begin to see patterns everywhere, and the patterns begin to see you. In small towns and quiet diners, people whispered their stories to him. Lights that blinked outside bedroom windows, sudden power failures, or visits from polite strangers who seemed to know too much. He wrote everything down, pages and pages of fragments that felt less like journalism and more like a diary from another world. He was no longer just observing the phenomenon. He was inside it. And though he did not know it yet, that fog would soon take him to a small town called Point Pleasant, and into the story that would define the rest of his life. Chapter 4. The Tricksters Theater. John Keel had always believed that mysteries could be solved with patience, logic, and evidence, but by the time he reached Point Pleasant, West Virginia, he began to sense that the phenomenon was not just something to be studied, it was something that performed. He noticed how sightings flared up like stories being told, lights in the sky, winged figures, phantom visitors, each arriving right on cue as if rehearsed. When attention faded, the activity quieted, only to return later in a new form, wearing a new mask. To Keel, it felt deliberate. The phenomenon behaved less like a machine from another planet and more like an actor who adjusts to the audience. He began to describe it as the Tricksters Theater. Every performance carried familiar themes: fear, wonder, prophecy. People saw what they were ready to see and believed what the story demanded. Those who wanted contact received messages of peace. Those who feared invasion saw machines and monsters. It was never random. It seemed tailored, personal, intimate. The phenomenon could speak through dreams or broken radios. It could appear in mirrors or in the corner of an eye. It could fill the sky with light or whisper through the telephone. Keel realized it did not just imitate technology, it imitated meaning. He wrote that the phenomenon borrows from our minds the shapes we will understand. It reflects us, our myths, our expectations, our fears, and returns them to us as signs. The more he examined this idea, the more he saw it everywhere. Religious visions, psychic predictions, poltergeist activity, even folklore about fairies or jinn, all followed the same strange script. The trickster played through them all, changing costume with each generation. In some accounts, the trickster brought enlightenment. In others, disaster. But always it blurred the boundary between the real and the imagined, leaving behind confusion that felt somehow intentional. Keel's notes from this time read less like research and more like a private reckoning. He began writing in fragments, sketches of ideas he could not quite finish. They want attention, not understanding. The message is always the same. Look closer, then doubt what you see. This is a conversation between two worlds, but only one of them knows the rules. It was no longer clear to him who was observing whom. At night, as he reviewed his notes by lamplight, he began to feel the weight of the mystery pressing in. The phenomenon was not simply showing him patterns, it was showing him himself, his curiosity, his need for order, his limits. The stage lights were on, the curtain had risen, and the trickster was smiling. Chapter 5. The Masks Turn Back. At first, John Keel thought the oddities were coincidences, faulty wiring, crossed phone lines, a tired mind finding patterns in noise. But slowly, the strange events that had surrounded his witnesses began to follow him, as if the phenomenon had turned its gaze in his direction. It started with the telephone, calls that came late at night, full of static and mechanical echoes. Sometimes a voice repeated his own words back to him. Other times it spoke his name before he had answered. He would hang up, then pick up again and hear nothing but the faint hum of the line. Letters arrived in envelopes with no return address. Some contained pages from his own manuscripts, photocopied and marked. Once, a note appeared under his apartment door that simply read, "Stop asking questions." He laughed it off in public, calling it the cost of chasing mysteries. But privately he began to keep two journals, one for his research and one for what he called the bleed, the moments when the phenomenon stepped out of the reports and into his own life. Streetlights flickered when he passed. Radios turned on without being touched. His watch stopped whenever he sat down to write about Point Pleasant. He grew accustomed to coincidences that arrived too perfectly timed to be chance. One night, after hours of work, he heard a knock at the door of his Manhattan apartment. When he opened it, the hallway was empty. Only the elevator light moved, cycling slowly between floors. He wrote, "The city itself feels alive, as if I am being studied through my own reflections." Friends noticed the change in him. He seemed distracted, distant, caught in a fog of sleepless curiosity, but he insisted he was fine, that he had to keep observing even if the observation was now mutual. He once said, "When you stare long enough into the phenomenon, it begins to stare back." The journalist who had set out to report on lights in the sky now found himself part of the pattern. The calls, the coincidences, the feeling of being watched. It all felt orchestrated, but by whom? By what? He no longer tried to explain it. He only wrote. Notes filled his apartment, pinned to walls, scattered across the floor, connected by bits of string and quiet hope. If the phenomenon wanted attention, it had it. And in that silence between each strange event, Keel began to feel something deeper, not fear, exactly, but a sense that he had been chosen for a conversation he could not control. Chapter 6. Keel's Revelation. By the late 1960s, John Keel had seen enough to know that the mystery was not mechanical. It did not behave like a fleet of visitors from another world, obeying the logic of engines and metal. It behaved more like a story, one that rewrote itself in response to whoever read it. He began to understand why the phenomenon always slipped through the fingers of science. It was not an object in the sky. It was an experience that changed shape depending on the mind that perceived it. He called this idea Operation Trojan Horse. The name came from the old myth of deception. Humanity had invited the UFO legend inside, believing it to be a gift from the stars, but within it hid something older and stranger, a force that had been here all along, wearing new disguises for each new age. He wrote, "The gods of old, the demons, the fairies, the shining visitors, they are the same actors in different costumes." Keel no longer believed in a cosmic invasion. He believed in a cosmic performance. The phenomenon did not arrive from the heavens. It emerged from the intersection of mind and myth, where imagination becomes visible and belief gives it form. He noticed how the phenomenon responded to attention. Investigate it and it multiplies. Doubt it and it fades. Try to capture it and it changes shape. It was not hiding, it was reflecting. In his journals, Keel began to write less like a reporter and more like a philosopher. "The phenomenon uses belief as its camouflage," he wrote. "It tells us what we already suspect, and then it vanishes before we can prove it." He came to suspect that the human mind itself might play a role in generating these encounters, that perhaps we are not observers of the unknown, but participants in it. Maybe, he thought, the phenomenon was not an external visitor at all, but a mirror, a living reflection of our fears, our faith, and our hunger for meaning. That thought frightened him, but it also filled him with awe, because if it were true, then every myth, every vision, every strange light in the night sky was part of a grand conversation between humanity and something vast, a dialogue that stretched across centuries, written in symbols and synchronicities. Keel's revelation was not that UFOs were fake. It was that they were realer than real, woven into the fabric of experience itself, too close to measure, too strange to dissect. He stopped looking for landing sites. He started looking for patterns in history and language and the timing of coincidences. The phenomenon was everywhere once you learned how to see it. And once you saw it, you could not unsee it. Chapter 7: The Legacy of the Trickster. When Operation Trojan Horse was published in 1970, the world of UFO research did not quite know what to do with it. Keel's conclusions were too strange for skeptics and too skeptical for believers. He rejected the idea of flying saucers from outer space, but refused to call the witnesses liars. He offered no comfort, no simple answers, only a larger and more bewildering mystery. Yet his words spread quietly, like seeds carried by the wind. Other thinkers began to take notice. Jacques Vallée, the French astronomer turned investigator, came to many of the same conclusions, suggesting that the phenomenon might be a control system, something that interacts with human consciousness, shaping it over time. Writers like Alan Greenfield, later the author of Secret Cipher of the UFO Naughts, built directly on Keel's foundation. They treated the phenomenon as something ancient and intelligent, using symbols and numbers to communicate with humanity. Even fringe mystics, artists, and philosophers found inspiration in Keel's trickster model, seeing in it a reflection of creativity itself, the spark that blurs reality and imagination. In academic circles, Operation Trojan Horse never earned formal acceptance, but its influence could be felt in unexpected places, in anthropology, in psychology, in the study of folklore. The idea that myths are not just old stories but living forces found new resonance. Keel himself became something of a reluctant prophet. His mailbox overflowed with letters from people who had seen strange lights, heard voices, or felt the presence of something just beyond understanding. He answered when he could, but he often warned them not to dig too deeply. The phenomenon, he said, does not reward curiosity. Over the years, he faded from the spotlight, retreating into the quiet of his New York apartment. He continued to write, to think, to collect reports, but the tone of his later work grew softer, almost tender. The trickster had exhausted him, yet he still admired it, that vast intelligence that could only be glimpsed through the cracks of coincidence. Today, Keel's ideas still ripple through the undercurrents of modern high strangeness. Whenever a story refuses to fit neatly into logic, when it mixes the paranormal with the personal or the cosmic with the absurd, you can hear echoes of his voice in the background. He had looked at the world and found it stranger, deeper, and more interconnected than anyone wanted to admit, and in doing so, he gave language to the in-between. John Keel left behind no final theory, only a question. What if the unknown is not something out there, but something that lives in the spaces between us and what we believe? Chapter 8, Reflections and Outro. John Keel never found the answers he spent his life searching for, but maybe that was the point. He often said that the universe does not offer explanations, only invitations. That the real mystery is not in what we see, but in how we see it. In his later years, he stopped chasing lights in the sky and began writing about the inner landscape, the way wonder and confusion live side by side in the human mind. He called it the greatest show in the universe, a play performed without a script, where meaning shifts every time the curtain rises. When asked what he ultimately believed, he said he believed in curiosity, in keeping the question alive, even when the answer refused to appear. Perhaps that is why his work still lingers. His words remind us that belief and disbelief are not opposites, but partners. Each gives the other shape. Without doubt, belief becomes rigid. Without wonder, skepticism becomes hollow. The truth, if there is one, lives somewhere in between. Tonight, as the lights fade and the city sleeps, imagine Keel at his desk, surrounded by folders and half-finished notes. The glow of a single lamp, the faint hum of a radio. Outside, the sky stretches quiet and endless, holding its secrets the way it always has. Maybe the trickster is still out there, not mocking us, but keeping us awake, reminding us that mystery has its own kind of mercy. Because if everything were known, the world would lose its shimmer. You have been listening to the High Strangeness Sleep Society. From the quiet shores of the wise people of the water, where the rivers keep their secrets and the mountains stand guard. Until we meet again, good night and sleep well.